What's up, YouTube? What up? Doing a little voiceover league this morning, so y'all get to follow along while I have coffee and breakfast and go over a league that I played last night. So people are asking a lot about Rakdos, and I had another league last night that kind of showcased the deck off stream. So just wanted to do a quick run through of those matches and give people a little more gameplay experience with the deck in case you're thinking of picking it up for an FNM or something. So here we go. This is the list that we ran. This is almost the exact same that we ran with the challenge. I think the only differences are I cut the Liliana of the Veil on the board for a third Turok, and I cut the Lily for a Turok, the Kozilek's Return for an EE, and there was one other spot that I cut for a third Dolthy. But mostly it's just streamline the sideboard. Now we've got three really strong plays against blue-white control and the three Turoks. We've got a little extra Grave Hate with the third Dolthy. And then the EE is great for Hammer Time. And of course the three Blood Moons. So this is what we're running with. Let's start going ahead and jumping into these matches so you can see what they're all about. Move this to the other side. Move some windows around if they're not stuck. All right. First match here. So we win the die roll, which is huge. Our opening hand looks like this. Yeah, it's about the right spot. Opening hand, we've got a Channeler, Croxa, Knight's Whisper, Push, 3 lands. It's it's not the most exciting hand, but it's really functional. We've got pressure, we've got our mana, we've got a late game bomb. If our opponent's playing any sort of creature deck, we've got interaction. If they're not, then we just have Channeler into a turn two Knight's Whisper to try to find some more gas. We're almost at delirium with land, creature, instant, sorcery if we can get this fatal push online. So it's a reasonable hand. It's not like an S tier keep, but it's a solid B plus keep. I don't think it's worth going down, especially on the play. So Sacred Foundry, Prismatic Ending. When you see Sacred Foundry, you think burn. When you see Prismatic Ending, you're no longer sure, but it's Yorion, so some sort of 4-color Yorion pile. I could go for the Scourge here, but my opponent just showed me Prismatic Ending, and I really don't want to play out the Scourge into another ending or something that can kind of interact profitably with my Scourge here. So I think I'm just going to take the opportunity to get Croxa. Maybe they discard a removal spell, and I get Scourge online. A little safer. I eat my sandwich too. So opponent goes for a turn 2 Ren. We get this Scourge down. If they Teferi bounce, which it looks like they're going to do right now, we're a little behind. It's not like the end of the world because with this Ren and 6 getting fetch lands back and us able to lower our own life total, this Scourge can just very well be a 1-turn clock. So, if there's a turn they can't deal with it, if they go turn 4, play an Omnath, something like that, then we could just potentially end the game on the spot. And if opponent is to playing new Teferis and minusing, then I'm assuming they don't have like a Solitude or something to get rid of the Scourge permanently. Because you're just like giving up Teferis to bounce something, not deal with it indefinitely. So we have a few options here. We could bolt down the Teferi, just get it off the board. We could bolt them to make both of these Scourges lethal next turn. But ultimately, I kind of decided to play conservative and just pass here. If my opponent plays out a blocker on their turn, or worse, an Omnath, then I'm probably going to want to bolt them. So I don't want to make the decision on this bolt right away. Um, Holding up this fetch land as long as possible because that's going to help me with Revolt for Fatal Push in case they do have an Omnath. So anytime you've got the option to kind of defer the decision to later without much of a tempo loss, it's usually a pretty good idea. But even if they do have a way of dealing with Scourge, like if they untap and hard cast a Solitude, which would be quote worst case scenario, because their life total's higher than mine, I only gain 8 life off this Scourge, which means I go to 16. The other Scourge lives as a 4/4. So if they do Solitude, I have the option to fetch and shock down to 13, Agadim down to 10, bolt the Scourge or bolt the Solitude, and I can just put them down to 5. Uh, no, put them down to 4, 2, hitting them for 8. Yeah, down to 4. Oh, it's too early in the morning. That could like kill a Solitude, put them down to 4. Plus, like a fetch, they might be in bolt range right there. And I've still got like a redraw, still got Croaks in the bin. So like even if they do hard cast a Solitude, it's not the worst case scenario. And spreading seas means my opponent's probably just like digging for an answer to Scourges. But because they've shocked now, it just means that either Scourge is lethal. If they did find a Solitude, I would gain 11 and go to 19, and Scourge just becomes a 1/1. But I can fetch and shock down to 16, Agadim's Awakening down to 13, bolt myself down to 10. Now Scourge is all of a sudden back up to a 10/10 and could swing for lethal. So, good times. Either way, opponent scoops up game 1. They can't find an answer to our Scourges. That's really the power that Scourge puts out is if your opponent doesn't have something like a Solitude, it runs them over very, very quickly. Game 2, much more proactive hand than game 1. We've got multiple 1-mana threats. We've got an Inquisition. So we can choose if we want to lead on Channeler or Ragavan. Have Inquisition on turn 2. Or if we want to dodge like a Wrenn and 6, we could Inquisition on 1. Opponent does most of the work for us and mulls down to 5, which is obviously very, very nice. So when I have an opponent that's like mulling this deep, I'm going to go ahead and lead on the hand disruption spell. That means there's a really good chance that like both of these 1-drops are going to survive. Especially if I can tag something like a Wrenn and 6 here. But our opponent's 80 card deck has got their Veil of Summer. I really hope they weren't like aggressively mulling for Veil of Summer, because that's very, very counterproductive. All right. And then here we're just jamming Scourge. If they've got a counter spell, it's fine. which, your 80 card deck having Veil of Summer into counter spell. What are you going to do? And then top deck of Blood Moon. So we're going to Windmill Slam that and see what happens. Ice Fang Coatl means that they probably aren't going to be able to answer this Blood Moon. See, they add Yorion to hand, so we do have to worry about them just like hitting land drops. And I'm guessing that means they missed their land drop, because if they had hit it, they'd be very far ahead right now. I say very far ahead, not like very, very far ahead, but you kind of get the idea. So sideboarding, before I forget, brought in like the 3 copies of Turok for the 3 fatal pushes. Brought in the 3 Blood Moons for the K command and the 2 Battle Rages. And that's about all that I'm bringing in. Like, the key to these 4-color matchups is twofold. Like, one, you need some sort of early pressure, whether it be Channeler, Ragavan, turn 2 Scourge, just something on the board that they have to deal with, because then you get them tapping off of mana and not being able to just like hold up and slam Omnaths or whatever. And then you need some sort of haymaker, whether that be Turok, Blood Moon in this case, Kroxa escaping, just something to pressure the hand in a second way as opposed to just being on the board. Either way, that's match number 1. Let's go to match number 2. Coffee's getting cold. All right. So again, we win the die roll. Again, fantastic. Winning the die roll, not this hand. Hand's terrible. Like, the second Battle Rage is essentially a mold of 6 already. So if you take the Battle Rage out of the equation, is this a keepable 6? And I would say no. You've got a turn 1 play, which is nice. You've got a Street Wraith as a redraw, but the Shockland plus the Wraith still leaves you 4 life off of getting a Shadow down. So even if you draw a fetch, you're not getting Shadow. You could get Kroxa, but you're still 2 mana off of escaping Kroxa. And if my plan involves Kroxa, that means I just have to hit a bunch of lands and no action spells. So the quickest this hand is looking at killing would be like let's say I draw 3 straight fetches. Then I get turn 1 Channeler, turn 2 Fetch, Cycle Wraith, Kroxa. Channeler's still not online. I've only got creature and land. Hit for 1. Turn 3, Fetch, Shock, Shadow. Shadow's a 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's a 3/3. Hit for 1 again. Turn 4, Fetch, Shock. I can hit for 7. Maybe escape a Kroxa. So we're looking at like turn 5 before we're lethal. Ugh. On the play, that's definitely not what I'm looking for. Our mulligan skills are rewarded. We get a turn 1 Ragavan into a turn 2 Scourge with some fetch lands. So that's going to snowball a lot quicker than that first hand. So let's get down to Ragavan. Also, while we're playing this one, big props to Freedmania, who played the list yesterday to a 5-0, 10-0. So if you've got questions about the deck and you don't want to ask me, Freed apparently knows how it works. Like, we had a trophy with it, or we went 9-1 with it, I think, on Friday. Top 32 the challenge with it. Had another 4-1 on stream yesterday and a 4-1 off of stream. So the deck has been doing very, very well. I could Fatal Push. Just going to attack and try to use this Ragavan as a removal spell if they choose to block. It also took a lot of strength to not or not play this Aether Vial. Because I really, really wanted to, but decided to go for this line of utilizing K command here as a 2-for-1 on turn 2. If they play any creature on turn 2, I still have the Fatal Push plus attack Ragavan. I can get down Scourge is a 5/5, maybe a 6/6 if they have to ping themselves. Or if they don't do anything and I find a land, I can double Scourge. But Ancient Ziggurat kind of gives it away that this is probably humans, which Horizon Canopy into Noble Hierarch could give you that impression. So maybe you're smarter than me and made that assessment off of the first play or off of their first play. But obviously, them discarding Reflector Mage was a giveaway. But if for some reason you still thought it was like Bant Company or something, Ancient Ziggurat kind of solidifies that it's a humans deck. So Thalia's not bad. So I'd go ahead and get that off the board because I want to be able to double spell and attack in with Ragavan. Here we're just going to get Channeler down. Worst case scenario would be Mantis Rider this turn. But as we can see, this is in fact not Mantis Rider. I was really curious what they were going to name with Meddling Mage, which they named Fury. I guess it's a reasonable choice, but then they're just going to immediately throw this Meddling Mage away. So we say, cool, here's a Scourge. Now, Reflector Mage would be a big inconvenience here. And that is, in fact, what Imperial Recruiter grabs. But we top deck an Inquisition of Kozilek because we're just gamers who want this match more. So Inquisition's actually going to give us Delirium. Come on. Oh, yeah. And then opponent just scoops to this. Because I would probably just bin this Scourge. I don't really need a third one. Like, I've got plenty of pressure with the first two. And I'd rather find, like, another removal spell. But either way, while we were getting ready to click opponent scoops, because we're 100% taking Reflector Mage, like, I don't even think there's any consideration for whatever the second card is. I'm sure somebody will make a comment like, well, what if it's a second Reflector Mage? If it was a second Reflector Mage, they would have played a Reflector Mage last turn. So, all right. Game 2, sideboarding. I brought in on the draw, took out a couple copies of Ragavan. It's really, really bad into like Champion of the Parish, Thalia, Thalia's Lieutenant, um, basically anything they can do in the first couple turns. Brought in 2 copies of Blood Moon. So Blood Moon's like really solid if we have like a turn 1 Ragavan, or if we're able to clear out Aether Vial. It's not nearly as good on the draw as it is on the play, but I kind of had enough stuff that I wanted to board out, which is like some of these Street Wraiths because it is going to be a race, and then a couple Thought Seizes because with Aether Vial and their Mana Dorks, they're going to get all their stuff out on the board and just be playing off the top of their deck very fast. So I don't want to be hitting hand disruption spells in the mid to late game. Plug in this mouse before it dies. The board ends. I mentioned the 2 copies of Blood Moon. I boarded in 1 Turok, mainly for the pro white, so you can stand in front of like champions, Thalia's lieutenants, Adeline's, whatever. Boarded in the 2 copies of Terminate. So 2 Terminate, 2 Blood Moon, and the Engineered Explosives, the Pyrite Spell Bomb. And the last one was obviously Pyrite Spell Bomb, Engineered Explosives, 2 Blood Moons, 2 Terminates, and a Turok. Yeah. An okay hand. I say okay. Like, we've got a lot of removal, but it's going to depend on like Ragavan getting in there. And I absolutely messed up right here. I should have inquisitioned for the information. I was like so needy to get a mana advantage, but humans has access to like Sanctifier on Vec that could really just shut this hand down. So I need the Inquisition here, especially now that I've found the second land. But I choose to go for the Ragavan to try to get like a triple spell. Because I'm kind of hoping that they'll just drop a Thalia here and I get to um, kill it, double spell somehow. But they drop it Auriok Champion, which was way lower on my radar than Thalia or Sanctifier on Vec. So Auriok Champion's going to make this Scourge of the Skyclaves look really, really bad. Take the freebooter because I've got answers to everything else, which will go ahead and just like take the Mantis Rider. So here I just have like no way of answering this Auriok Champion outside of Engineered Explosives, but they attack with it for some reason, which my assumption means that they're going to have like a Thalia or something to violin and block. Um, but instead they have a Phantasmal Image to copy the Auriok Champion. So I decided just to scoop it up here. Like, the first one was already really rough. The second one, if I don't find EE like immediately, is too much. And even if I do find EE immediately, like they've got more draws, they can find more stuff. So we're just gonna move on to game 3. All because we did an Inquisition on one. And it's mainly because I was thinking, okay, Sanctifier on Vex like a 2 of maybe. Like, surely it's not that prevalent. Wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. But all right, game 3, we're on the play. And this is kind of what I was hoping for on the play, is just like turn 1 Ragavan, turn 2 Blood Moon. If they don't have an Aether Vial, that's better. So maybe I want a Thoughtseize first to try to clear that out of the way. Then I see that they're mulliganing. So I decided to just like risk it for the turn 2 Blood Moon. Then they play that glorious, glorious Ancient Ziggurat, which, if you don't know, Ancient Ziggurat can only tap for mana for creature spells. So you cannot cast an Aether Vial off of an Ancient Ziggurat. It's like one of the things that can make humans have some awkward hands from every now and then. All right, so the Terminate here is solely for the purpose of mana efficiency. Um, I wanted to get this treasure here so I can maybe Lightning Bolt a 2-drop into turn, as long as it's not Thalia, untap, slam Blood Moon. Because I feel like if I dodge this turn right here, I win. And another Champion of the Parish means like they just do not have another land. So yeah, we're going to end a turn, kill that, untap, and Windmill Slam a Blood Moon. So now you can cast an Aether Vial, which you know happens. But even with Aether Vial, like I've got a lot of pressure going on here. Got a third champion of the parish. So like they were really hoping to hit another land and just knock out champion of the parishes. Take the phantasmal image so they can't copy my scourge. And next turn I'll have the option to just hit them for 8. Uh Scourge is lethal after that. I can play a Turok if I want. I can dismember. Doesn't matter. I've just got the board presence, and the best thing they can do is put in a champion of the parish, which I've got dismember for. So win that one. Let's go to match number 3. Sitting at a pretty 2-0, feeling good. Lose a die roll, so Moto's rigged against us. Pretty good hand. So we've got like plenty of 1-drops to play out. We're 3/4 of the way towards proactive delirium. So one thing I'll talk about here and there, and I do the same thing with like Jun Shadow when we're playing Traverse, is there's 2 forms of delirium. There's like proactive and reactive delirium. Proactive delirium is hands where I can use my spells regardless of what my opponent does. So, like hand disruption spells, lightning bolt, seal of fire, tar fire, Mishra's bauble, street wraith, fetch lands. Those are all Croxa. Those are all proactive delirium enablers. They're things that you can just like, if my opponent's on a fair deck, I can use it on creatures or planeswalkers, uh, or just go face. If they're on an unfair deck, I can still just go face, enable my cards. Reactive delirium would be things like fatal push, drown in the lock, um, unholy heat, um, what else? Spell pierce, cards that I have to target something. So like I can potentially target my own things, but more often than not, I'm not using these cards unless my opponent puts something out there that I can interact with. So in a deck like this, proactive delirium is way, way, way more preferred because I don't want to have my entire deck hinging on what my opponent does. So with a hand like this, I've got Cycle Wraith, I've got a fetch, I've got Bolt Face with double channeler to help enable delirium. And all I got to do is flip over a sorcery, an artifact, something like that. And that just means that if my opponent's playing like Tron, I can just throw my spells out there and try to flip over delirium. If they're playing a creature deck, I can kill creatures. Like, you get what I mean, right? You just don't have to sit back and wait and see. You can be on the front foot. And I think that's one of the really big strengths of this deck is just being able to like play your stuff and not have to worry about what your opponent's doing. You can react here and there. You can adjust whether like this lightning bolt is proactive or reactive based on what your opponent's doing. But you're not just like at a standstill. So 9 times out of 10, if your opponent thought seizes or inquisitions you and leaves the Ragavan, it's because they have an answer to the Ragavan. But if they don't, like it's got the highest upside. Channeler's not getting delirium for me. It's not a very exciting turn 1 play, so I'm just going to throw out the Ragavan anyway. They follow up with a Dolthy, which is A-okay with me. Blood Moon. So I really, really considered slamming the Blood Moon here, just like fetching up a basic swamp, cutting them off of black, because I don't know what the rest of their hand is. Um, I assume if they're playing Blood Moon in the deck that they don't actually like care. It's not hurting them. Uh, but they did fetch shock, and that's usually not a play pattern that the Blood Moon deck is like really trying to do without actual Blood Moon. So they could have had a hand that was weak to it. But I'm just going to take the initiative to like go ahead and play out to the board aggressively. And then this was a great moment for the home team. Um, Opponent decides to evoke Fury, and if you're a scam player, take note of turns like this. Um, I know that on stream, I'll mess up sequencing all the time. A lot of it happens because I'm just like more focused on chat than I am on the game. But sequencing is so incredibly important in the game of Magic, especially when it comes to like knowing what is going on or what the possibilities are. Um, Having all of the information available to you when you can play, or regarding what you can or can't play when you can play it. So my opponent invokes this Fury, discarding Seasoned Pyromancer. So like I'm 99% sure that they're a scam deck. Thoughtseize into Dolphy, into Evoke Fury off of Spyro. So I'm expecting some sort of rebirth effect. I didn't want to cycle this Street Wraith last turn because I didn't really want to give the Dolphy a Street Wraith. So not so much because I think like Street Wraith is some unbeatable clock, but because it's a 3/5 that I can't block if they do clear up the board and just stands in front of like Ragavan, Channeler, all this really, really well. So I kept the Wraith in hand, and now we have an interesting situation. Opponent has evoked this Fury. They have not chosen targets for it. Now they have. So first off, they misstacked their triggers. And that might have something to do with this next play, but they could have stacked the Fury to deal the 4 damage first and then die. Dealing that 4 damage would have made me put all my cards on the table. If I've got anything, I've got to do it then. But instead, they put the evoke trigger to resolve first. So now they have to go ahead and Undying Evil it. So it dies, it comes back. They've got this 4 damage originally listed on the Scourge, and they go ahead and fire off the other 4 on the Dragon's Rage Channeler and the Ragavan. So now I get to just like let that resolve, or cycle the Street Wraith, let it resolve, and now I get a Scourge. But if opponent had stacked their triggers correctly, dealt the 4 damage first, I would have had to have responded to that with Cycle the Street Wraith. They Undying Evil, get the Fury back. They can deal the extra 2 damage to the Scourge, +1 to the Channeler, +1 to the Ragavan, and just completely wipe my board, decimate me. And I don't know if they stacked the triggers, like if they misclicked on the trigger stacking, or if they thought that it didn't matter there, that there was just like no way I could interact. Um, so it's tough to say. Like if opponent thought there was nothing I could do there and it didn't matter, then it was a misplay on their part. It was a punt because they could have done um, a kind of standardized clean sequencing and completely wiped my board. But if it was just a misclick, then we got out of that lucky. But it just goes to show that, like, even in a situation that you don't think it matters, try to be diligent about, like I said, proper sequencing making the correct lines at the correct times, even if you think nothing can happen, because you just don't know. It's one of those situations where it's free to just deal the 4 damage first and then Undying Evil. So kind of might as well do that. All right. And then they decide to go ahead and like make matters worse and attack in with the Dolphy, which I don't really know what the reasoning there was. But we're going to attack with the Scourge first. So if they've got another Undying effect in hand, which they do, that does mean that they have to kill off this Scourge, and I can follow it up with like double Shadow. This Dolphy does have access to my Scourge now, which is pretty scary. I do have like a couple ways to chump block it, so it's not the end of the world. And they go for a dashed Ragavan instead, so I say sure. Like I don't think there's a lot you're gonna hit for 1 mana that really uh, hurts my board position that badly. Draw Peatland, so that means I can dash Ragavan and attack in. Remember that Dolphy has to follow timing restrictions, so there's nothing they can cast over on my side right at this moment. But dash Ragavan means that this Fury has to chump block. Can't kill the Ragavan because they'd be taking 10 and dying. I'm fine trading off Shadow. Hit the Thoughtseize, which means I get to take the Ragavan out of their hand, ditch this land, and now like I've got a pretty steady board position. They don't have access to any removal spells with Dolphy. If they do find a removal spell off the top, then they could kill something like kill the Shadow, Dolphy into the Scourge, but then I just have dash Ragavan. I can attack around it with the Channeler and the Ragavan. They do not have an extra card in hand, so they can't like evoke something. Best draw out of them would be a Spyro, but even a Spyro, unless they hit land removal spell, just puts one extra body on board. They're still dead on the board. So we will take our win there. Ultimately, like our opponent, I think, should have swapped out that Dolphy for something pretty aggressively. Dolphy's not blocking. We're kind of controlling the board. Yeah, they had Fury that looked decent, but like they could have really put the pressure on the or on me to find some answers very, very quickly. And ultimately, I think played like a little too passively. So sideboard, I took out the 3 Inquisitions for the 3 copies of Dolphy and the 2 Battle Rages for 2 Terminates. Just additional ways of interacting with like the scam effects. If you're unfamiliar, Dolphy exiles when something goes to the graveyard. So a Malakir Rebirth effect or something like that triggers when a creature dies. But if it gets exiled, they don't have the ability to get anything back. So it just shuts down like 6, 7 cards out of their deck. And then the 2 Terminates are a great way to answer something that's been evoked and rebirthed. And now if you're just staring down a 4/4 double striker, but Terminate's a good way of dealing with that. Uh, Reasonable hand. Like they're going to be fetching and shocking, so I know Scourge is going to be online pretty quickly. Thoughtseize to help interact. Lightning Bolt, same thing. Turn 2 Shadow between Fetch, Shock, Thoughtseize, Fetch, Shock. So I've got proactive spells. I've got threats. I say they're going to fetch Shock, and then they immediately Blackcleave Cliffs and a Ragavan. So gonna pass the turn here and plan on lightning bolting during combat. So I could lightning bolt on my turn to play around like a Malakir Rebirth effect. Uh, but ultimately I'm kind of fine if they do that. That means they're not rebirthing like a grief or something, and I do still have just like another answer for Ragavan or whatever. So no second land out of them. We top deck the backup Thoughtseize. Thoughtseize bug. It's real. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. So Fatal Push, Fury, Grief, and a Kroxa. Just going to take the Fatal Push here. If they want to evoke the Fury and exile the Grief, like that's a win for me. I will absolutely trade a Shadow here for a Kroxa and a Fury. And even like an exiled Kroxa. Not playing the Scourge here because I don't want to let my opponent. I will trade Shadow for Fury plus Kroxa. I will not trade Shadow and Scourge for Fury plus Kroxa. But opponent's going to exile their Kroxa anyway to grief me, which is sure. If they had decided to get it back, if they did have like a rebirth effect on the grief there, then they would probably have to take the terminate first, rebirth, take a scourge, which means if I draw like a fetch land, I can fatal push. If not, I still have access to a scourge, which can outrace the grief really easily. And of course, we Thoughtseize bug again. And I kind of just decide like I'm not playing out this scourge because I think the only way I lose here is if my opponent gets to like evoke a fury, rebirth it, wipe my board. I have to terminate it, and then they just have like some sort of follow up. And I just kind of feel like I don't have to play into that right there. And that's actually why I choose to not play the Scourge here. I just feel like they have to deal with this shadow right now. And if they don't deal with it, then I'm going to have the ability to just play like a Scourge that can't be hit with Fury plus Undying Malice on a Fury plus another Undying Malice on my turn. And like, that's just going to be way, way, way too much for them to overcome. Dash Ragavan. Again, this is mostly just to get the Scourge bigger than an 8/8. So again, if they have Evoke Fury plus Undying Malice effect, they can't get Scourge off the board. Like they have to have Terminate, in which case I have like next turn Dash Ragavan again, play another Scourge. Incremental value drip. But yeah, that entire match was mostly like, hey, I can play conservatively, so I'm going to. I think the only way my opponent gets out of this is with evoking something, getting it back. And so I'm just going to like choose to play around that. Now they could evoke a grief and get it back, but they would have had to have drawn grief, black card, and undying effect in 3 draw steps. And although it's very likely my Moto opponents could do that, I want to play the odds. All right. On the play, good hand, fairly proactive. We've got a turn 1 Ragavan, Wraith. We've got K Command online. If we find like a Thoughtseize or another Wraith or something, we can get Shadow down. So let's talk about turn 1s real quick. I see a lot of people like turn 1, fetch, shock, cycle Street Wraith in the blind here. And a lot of times we use the argument of like, oh, I'm looking for a Thoughtseize. on the play in the blind, there's almost zero chance I'm casting a Thought Seize before this Ragavan. The only exception I think I would make is if my hand was set up such that I had like a Shadow, a Battle Rage, a second Thought Seize, uh, two fetch lands or something. A hand where I could go turn one, fetch shock, thought seize, turn two, fetch shock, thought seize, wraith, shadow, turn three, fetch shock, battle rage. And if I don't have like that exact hand, I would almost 100% rather have the Ragavan. So if I would rather have the Ragavan, there's not a big reason to cycle Wraith looking for something else when this is like my best turn one play anyway. So cycling Wraith is just kind of throwing away percentage points if my opponent happens to be on like burn. But I do want to fetch and shock instead of just shocking because with this Wraith, if I find another fetch land, I've got Shadow online turn two. If I shock, I'm going down to 18. Next turn, fetch and shock to 15. Cycle Wraith to 13. Shadow's not online. So this gives me like a nice middle ground of, hey, if I'm against something aggressive, I haven't cycled my Street Wraith. I've saved 2 life. I've put that decision off to later. If I'm against something unfair, then I still have the potential for a turn 2 Shadow without having to go crazy on my life total here. So hope that helps a little bit. And of course, when we see Arid Mesa, I think like, oh my god, it is burn. Not burn. Not burn at all. So lightning bolt would make me think that it's Murktide. So now I decide, now that I know it's not burn, I decide to cycle the Street Wraith because if I find like an Inquisition or a Thoughtseize here, I'd like to cast it. Basic Mountain, not Murktide. So at the moment, I have zero idea what I'm up against. Steam Vents, Basic Mountain, Lightning Bolt. Like, Storm is a consideration, but usually they'd be running like Scalding Tarn, Polluted Delta, like a blue fetch. Ice to tap me down, so YoRhinos, but Steam Vents into Basic Mountain off an Arid Mesa is like not what I would expect YoRhinos to start on. So, like I said, at the moment I'm completely lost. I decided to play out the Shadow here because it doesn't die to fire. It could die to like a another lightning bolt, but I can't imagine bolt, fire, and ice being like a really good keep for most decks. And then they play the Dwarven Mine, so okay, now we know it's a creativity deck. Which my hand is like not bad against a creativity deck here. Ice down my Shadow, sure. I've got interaction for like the first creativity, which they proceed to not get. Renin 6 is fine. Let's pop out their graveyard. I always hate when Bodo like expands and retracts the graveyard when they start targeting stuff. All right. Go ahead and fetch because I don't want to draw into that Blood Crypt. And then K Command is going to shock them, get back Ragavan. This is mainly just to try to like push the clock as aggressively as I can. Which obviously finding Lightning Bolt helps with that a lot. Ice down Shadow again. Leyline binding off the top. We could actually cast that leyline binding. I've got mountain and swamp, so it's reduced down to 4 mana total. We've got 4, but not really doing anything for me. Theoretically, they should only be able to make 1 token this turn if they've got another Dwarven Mine to get. So I can interact very well with 1 token. I can't interact with like a clue token if they play Hard Evidence, but I think Hard Evidence has been like cut from all these lists now that they're running Leyline Binding and some of this bigger stuff. Fable of the Mirror Breaker is great. This also means that if my opponent is just relying on like getting a Dwarven Mine token after I deal with this Fable, then I do have that kind of wrapped up. So between this Ragavan, Lightning Bolt, and Dismember, I should be able to find lethal. They don't have another Fire and Ice. Only 3 copies of it. All right, so this was a fun spot. Like, I wanted to think if I could play around Lightning Bolt. Like, not put myself dead, because I could just Dismember, pay 4 life, kill the dwarf token, and now I've got a 10/10 shadow. But I don't want to put myself dead to Lightning Bolt. I don't think they have a Lightning Bolt. They haven't played like they have a Lightning Bolt, but it's kind of, in this case, free-ish to play around. So we're just going to pay 2 life, 2 mana, dismember this token. That makes it lethal on board. They have to deal with what I've got before they can do anything. And we just hit for lethal. But if they did have like removal spell for Ragavan, then I get to put them down to 1 so they can't fetch in any meaningful way. I could go ahead and bolt now and just hope they don't have spell pierce. But ultimately, like, the fewer game actions I have to take and the fewer things I expose myself to dying to, the better. Game 2 on the draw. So board ins, board outs. Boarding out the 3 copies of Fatal Push for the 3 copies of Blood Moon. Blood Moon is like an absolute all-star in this matchup. I'd probably argue this is the best matchup for Blood Moon in the current meta. Like, if you can deal with some of the red-based token makers or the tokens as they come up off like Fable, then Blood Moon can just like shut the rest of their deck down. I don't quote me on it. I'll double check real quick. Let's go to Goldfish. Popular decks, modern. I don't believe they play a basic planes. Yeah, they don't play a basic plane. So like Blood Moon completely shuts the deck out unless they have a Besage You up when you cast the Blood Moon, or they have like a Fable or something to make a token and then Creativity or Transmogrify off that Fable token. So as long as you can kind of play with those things in mind, they can also Prismari command in response to a Blood Moon and like make a treasure. But ultimately, your plan should be like trying to get into a position where that doesn't happen. Um, so boarded out the 3 Fatal Pushes for the Blood Moons. Boarded out a Ragavan on the draw because it dies to like Bolt, Wrenn and 6, Fire and Ice, a token in the way. Like, yeah, Blood Moon's our best plan, but Ragavan itself is a very frail enabler on the draw. So I would rather work towards like getting I'd rather work towards getting a more proactive clock going. And then boarded out the Croxa for an engineered explosives. that's what we're rolling with. Check out our hand. All right. Pretty good hand. Like we've got hand disruption to maybe stop like a Renin 6, interaction for tokens, and then if we get into a position where we can slam Blood Moon on turn 3, game could potentially just be over. So there is in fact the Renin 6, and I see that they don't currently have any sort of answer to Blood Moon. So if we um, are able to get this Blood Moon down on 3, it's probably just going to be lights out. Another Thoughtseize is fantastic. Now we just get to take the token producer. And I really want to play this Blood Crypt out before the Verdant Catacombs. I only need 1 Black Swords for this deck to function very well under Blood Moon. The only double pip cards we have are Street Wraith, which are almost never getting cast, and Agadeem's Awakening, which we can't cast under a Blood Moon anyway. We boarded out the Croxa, so that takes a double pip card out of the equation. But I feel like if I play the term, or if I shock in the Blood Crypt instead of playing the Catacombs, and not fetching or anything, then maybe there's a chance that if they do find a Beseiju, they don't hold up Blood Moon here or hold up Beseiju. So that's kind of like my hope process. And they shock in the Stomping Ground, and that's like absolutely terrifying because to me that screams, okay, I found a I found a Beseiju. I found a what's it called? The blue red Prismari command, and they're going to be able to interact with this Blood Moon or make a treasure token and transmogrify. But I kind of decided like this is my best case scenario. I'm not. I could play out a Shadow or a Channeler here and like try to interact over the Arid Mesa, but they don't have to go for it until I go for Blood Moon. And if I don't hit a land, it's going to be really awkward. And so we just slam, and it turns out that they had just drawn a Ketria Triome and wanted to be able to cycle it. So now Blood Moon is just like, yeah, you got next to nothing. Play out this Shadow here because I do kind of have it protected by Bolt. If they go to Bolt or Unholy Heat my Shadow or something, I can Bolt myself and save it. They decide to Bolt the Channeler. Yeah, so I'm just going to Bolt myself here to go ahead and get this Scry out of the way. I don't think they drew into double Bolt right there. But this means I don't have to play an awkward game of chicken with my Shadow. And opponent just scoops it up to that. So I'm probably, I probably am bolting myself here because it makes Shadow a 3-turn clock instead of a 5-turn clock. And I still have the Terminate to interact with like a, if they top deck a, what's it called? Fable, then I can still like hold up Terminate, Fable in response to Transmogrify on it. And my clock is very, very reasonable. All right. So 4-0 going into match number 5. Trophy match, all the proverbial marbles. All right. It's a decent, like, proactive hand, right? Kind of like I mentioned last time that we have good enablers. The problem is this being a fatal push and not a lightning bolt is a really big setback. So if this were a lightning bolt, it would be one of those proactive enablers of delirium that I talked about. Because it's fatal push, it's a reactive enabler. But if we do get to fatal push something, we have like a reasonable clock. Opponent revealed a Yorion, so I decided to lead on Dragon's Rage Channeler instead of Ragavan. So if they had like a prismatic ending, Unholy Heat or something, I'd rather them use it on this than Ragavan. But they suspend a footfall, so now race is on. Then finding the lightning bolt here is actually really huge because now I have a proactive enabler. Let's crack in, see what happens. Decides to fetch up their Triome. I'm assuming so that I can't accidentally exile it with Ragavan. And I decided to just like go for the bolt. I'm in a race situation. They're going to be getting down Rhinos very quickly. Bolt's not doing anything to Rhinos. So let's just go for the damage. And I happen to flip over Delirium until opponent has a force of negation on my lightning bolt. But they do have to ditch an Omnath for it, so that's not nothing. And they go for the double fire here. We are well prepared with the fatal push, our own Dragon's Rage Channeler, which is going to turn on Delirium for the other one. We didn't have instant in the yard. So now we get to keep our Channeler around and keep chugging in with some damage. Let's Knight's Whisper first in case we find something we'd rather play than the Ragavan. So we will absolutely take a Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt means that either one of my attackers plus Bolt is lethal next turn. They can't have Omnath plus a fetch land here. And if they do just go for Rhinos, that means I'm flying over with the Lightning Bolt. So this game was like a really good demonstration of when it's more important to just like go all in on the aggro plan. Don't try to play conservatively. Bolt on their turn to play around force negation blue card. But opponent has seen enough. Scoop it up, go to game 2. So we're against some sort of Rhinos build. We saw them have Solitude, Omnath, Cascade spell for Rhinos. We saw Fire and Ice, Dead and Gone. Uh, so it's just like 4-color Rhino pile card stuff. It's not a very good hand. Like, we've got Chandler, we've got proactive enablers, but we're like so far off of our payoffs that this is essentially like a mold of 6 already, maybe a mold of 5. And I kind of decide I can be more aggressive on a mold of 5. Turok again, a little bit slow. It's great against like the Omnath Solitude part. It's horrendous against the Rhinos part. But of course, we just find like more copies of Turok, which I guess I can go over the sideboarding real quick. On the draw, brought in 2 Blood Moons, took out the Battle Rages, brought in. What did I bring in? Brought in the 2 Chalices, the Engineered Explosives, 2 Blood Moons, uh, 2 Turoks. Brought out the 3 Fatal Push, 2 Battle Rage, a Ragavan on the draw, and Croxa. Usually I'll be like bringing out Croxa a lot when I'm bringing in Blood Moon, but especially against endurance matchups. So let's take Teferi because it's going to be their best way to like stabilize the board. And because I drew the second Scourge here, I'm just trying to throw out something to catch this Fire and Ice. So maybe I can find a way to sneak in a Scourge. But opponent immediately finds a Cascade spell for Rhinos. And I scoop it up there because I've got these 1/1 Scourges. They can't grow. If they were like Shadows, this would be a lot better. But as Scourges, not so much. And then game 3, we got a pretty fun one. All right, so I've got Ragavan, Chalice, bunch of bolts, Thoughtseize. It's not the most hard-hitting hand, but it's good and proactive. Like, I've got a turn 1 Ragavan. I've got Hand Disruption. I've got one of my better hate pieces in Chalice. Opponent suspends a Footfalls. We say, cool. Should have fetched and shocked before I cycled that Wraith, just for like the marginal thinning. Thoughtseize. So off of this Stomping Grounds Temple Garden, they cannot Leyline Binding until turn 3. And I don't think they run an Esper Triome. So I think the Ragavan's going to get another hit in. My best bet is probably just to take this Fury to make sure they can't interact with the Ragavan on turn 2. Which, as we see, they elect not to. And this is where it gets like a little unfortunate because we are flooding a lot and they top deck a Solitude. Talk about annoying Magic cards. We know about the Solitude gone. So we know their hand's Leyline Binding, Endurance. They cannot top deck both a land and a Cascade spell. So I don't really need to like throw out this Chalice and expose it to something just yet. Then here I decided to go for the Chalice to get the cycle off of the Channeler. Didn't care so much about the Wraith because I have plenty of ways to lower my life total with the 2 fetches. If I need to bolt myself, I can. But I go ahead and go for the Binding on the Chalice, which is okay because the Footfalls isn't coming off suspend next turn. But they do have this Endurance hanging around. All right. So this is where I have to like try to give myself a chance to win the game. So you're going to see like firing off lightning bolts at them. Try to get Delirium enabled. Get damage in. I'm not dead to 1 attack off these Rhinos. Keep Inquisition on top because it answers the Endurance on their side. So all I'm trying to do here is like set up the potential at finding another Lightning Bolt, finding a Teamer Battle Rage. Anything like that. Again, like I said, I'm not dead to this 10 ball right here from the Shardless and the Rhinos. So as long as they whiff on their draw, I've got at least a few potential outs. 2 more Lightning Bolts, 2. I think I kept in all my Battle Rages. No, I did not. Boarded out the Battle Rages. Well, 2 Lightning Bolts. Add Yorion to hand. So I'm hoping that add Yorion to hand just means they like don't have anything. But they actually just top deck the Solitude. So like our Lightning Bolt plan didn't really didn't matter. But I think it was important there to give ourselves an out. And the out was, like I said, just find Lightning Bolts. hope, pray, see what happens. Didn't work out, but we gave it a shot. Gave it the old college try. So yeah, that's little Rakdos Shadow. Hopefully you like the deck enough to at least give it a shot, see what happens. I think the deck is is pretty linear and powerful. Just make sure if you decide to pick it up, you're not playing too passively, because the end goal is always going to be like get your opponent from 20 to 0 for the most part as quick as you can. You have a few tools to kind of grind out games with Agadim, K Command, Croxa, Knight's Whisper, but really you're just like a Scourge deck. You're just trying to get your life low, your opponent's life low, gain a little bit of tempo along the way, and just close the game out with a big threat. So yeah, hope you enjoy the video. If you want to see more voiceover leagues like this, let me know. Otherwise, hope to catch y'all later. Adios for now.